Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Subscribers will remember that in the last episode, we spoke about the DB9 and its reported cat ingestion problem and why I really think it's not actually a problem. We also said that I was going to do a second video on the second main issue with these cars. Again, reported issue. So today's video, again, is going to be kind of a continuation of that. We're going to be looking at the DB9 and doing a bit of a reality check on the second main problem. And that second main problem is, yes, the dreaded Aston Tick. This is Aston Martin's 6-litre V12. Now, before we go any further, one small thing I want to clarify is there is a debate, and this is a bizarre debate, over the size of this engine. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going to call it a 6-litre engine. It's marked as a 6-litre engine. Aston called it a 6-litre engine. Every government authority in the world calls it a 6-litre engine. No matter where you go, this is a 6-litre engine. And yet, for some bizarre reason, there are a ton of people on the forums, a ton of people in clubs who insist that this should be called a 5.9. And I really don't understand why. It's not even 5.9, it's 5.9357 something. So where do you stop? As far as I'm concerned, I'm calling it a 6-litre. I'm always going to call it a 6-litre. It's marked as a 6-litre. On every form you ever have to fill out for emissions, for testing, for everything, it's marked as a 6-litre. So I'm going to call it a 6-litre. If you don't like that, you can call it a 5.9, but I'm sorry, it's a 6-litre and I'm sticking to it. Okay, let's get into the actual problem with this car, this reported problem. What it is a ticking problem. Yes, that'll be the first description you will hear. People will say, my car's developed a tick. Now, one critical difference between this problem and the catalytic converter ingestion problem is that this issue is, well, it's definitely more real. There are more examples. You can find examples where this problem has happened. It's not a case of hunt around and find one obscure example here and there. Yeah, unfortunately, this is a real problem. It does exist. But just like our catalytic converter ingestion problem, it's a little blown up. And the reality is it's not that bad. Don't get me wrong, it's bad when it happens. It's catastrophic when it happens. It's full-blown, absolute worst case scenario if you get this problem. The thing is, however, the people likely to get this problem, well, it's a very specific subset of the cars. And a lot of people don't recognize that. They don't know how to identify the cars at risk. And then there's the problem itself. So here's what we know. It's not just the DB9, it's the V12, which was used in other cars. So it's not just the DB9 that's affected. Although, again, it's in a very specific subset of the cars. What happens is the owners will report a ticking sound. And yes, it's an actual ticking sound. It's a tick, tick, tick sound that gets worse with engine RPM. It's heard around the engine because the problem is in the engine itself. And this is where we run into our first reality check problem. You see, we know something goes wrong with these. We know the result of what goes wrong with these, but how is still to this day a very debated point. Now, there are many people out there who will tell you absolutely they know exactly the cause and exactly the reason. But there is a bit of an issue when you ask them what causes this, try and get it into a one-line sentence, they can't do it. I have seen videos that are over an hour long from experts who, at the end of the video, you're still sort of left confused as to exactly what the hell they're talking about. There's a lot of contention, a lot of assumptions, and nobody's really 100% sure why, because if they were, I'm sure they'd be able to put it in one sentence or at least one paragraph. But a 30-minute video to explain this issue that differs from different experts, it says to me that nobody really truly understands this problem. Now, whilst we don't actually know the true cause of the problem, we do know the effects. What actually ends up happening to the engines and why there's a ticking sound? Well, what happens is this. It is catastrophic. It is very bad. What happens is one or more of the cylinders actually goes wonky, goes out of shape. It's no longer a perfect circle, and the piston no longer perfectly fits in it. It's called ovaling, And yeah, it's as bad as it sounds. What it means is the piston actually moves around slightly in the cylinder. Yes, it's slapping around. If you ever heard of piston slap, this is one of those effects where the piston is literally slapping the sides of the cylinder it's going up and down in. Now, this is a very small amount. Don't start thinking we're talking huge measurements here. These are very small measurements, but it's still enough to cause that effect. On top of that, we know below the piston, in the conrod, in the bearings, there's also play that develops there, and that's further movement and clicking around that happens. The end result is, as the engine's ticking over and the piston's going up and down, there's movement where it very much shouldn't be, and the engine is essentially rattling itself to death. And the tick is those parts literally slapping around, moving, hitting one another in ways that they very much should not be doing. And the worst part, you're probably already realizing the fix for this is, whoa, bad, really bad, because yes, you've got to pull the engine out, you have to pull out all the parts that have had a problem, and then you have to actually rebuild serious componentry. In some cases, you may not even be able to save the engine. In many cases you can. It's a case of rebuilding up the bores. It's a case of rebuilding all the parts up and putting it all back together again so that it's good. There's just one problem with that. You haven't actually fixed it because you don't know the cause of the problem, and it could just happen again. So yes, this is a very bad problem. It's extremely bad. It is real. There are verified examples of this. You can actually go and find examples where this has happened. And if we don't know why, it's very hard to fix an engine that's had it happen and provide any guarantee that it's going to happen again. Again, you can take it to all sorts of experts and they will tell you that they know the problem and they have sorted it for you. But when you've got other experts who don't necessarily say the same thing, it leaves you a bit in the dark as to, well, who really understands the problem and how do you really fix it? And now things get a little interesting because we were able to do a little bit more of a reality check on this. You see, when you start looking at it and you start saying, well, are all these engines affected? It turns out no. There seems to be a very specific subset of cars that are affected by this problem. And it's not what you think. It's a pattern related to where these specific engines were built. Yes, it turns out the most occurrences of this problem, the vast overwhelming majority of them, all appear on engines that were built here in the UK under. Now, I want to make it clear, there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that this is a problem itself. Themselves may have absolutely nothing to do with this problem because, again, we don't know the cause of the problem. This may be a design problem. It may be a manufacturing problem. Whatever the problem is, nobody's really clear enough or sure enough to say here is the cause. What we do know is that the probability of having a car that will develop the engine is very much higher if it has an engine built here in the UK from, again, not to say are the problem, they may be completely innocent in this. It's just that the cars that appear to be built from have a very high prevalence for this problem as opposed to cars where the engines were built elsewhere. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how do I identify if my engine's affected or if what I'm looking at is going to be affected? Well, it's very simple. You just look at the engine number. You see, what happened in 2005, Aston Martin shifted production for its engine from in the UK, it moved it to Cologne in Germany. This is part of that Ford era when Ford was consolidating and looking at ways to do cost saving, and one way was to move engine production to the plant in Cologne. Now, Cologne engines all got a different engine number, so you can actually identify by the Cologne engine number whether or not your car is affected. Now, I say affected, it can still happen. There are still some examples of this happening from Cologne engines, but they are exceedingly rare. It is very uncommon to find a car post engines that actually have this problem. It is still possible, even in a brand new Aston Martin, to see this very problem. You could buy a brand new Aston Martin V12 today and see this problem. Again, though, it is extraordinarily rare. If, however, you bought one of the produced engines, then yes, unfortunately, we start seeing a much higher risk of this problem occurring. So to help mitigate the risk, if you are looking at one of these, the first thing you should do is check the engine number. You want to make sure you've got a Cologne built engine. And that means it's an engine probably from around 2005 onwards. It's built in a plant, and the probability of experiencing this problem for whatever reason, which again, we don't know the cause, it just doesn't seem to happen as much. It's a very low frequency of the issue. It's no more than any new car. You're gonna find it very difficult to find one. I know, because every car I looked at when buying this one, it was one of the #1 checks. And I very rarely ever found a car with a engine, despite looking at even plenty of 2004 engines. And my theory is that all of those cars that have either had the problem or could have the problem, well, they've either had engine swaps, they've had work done on them, they've had things done to fix them up so that the problem's not there, because trying to find a DB9 or any of the Aston V12s with an engine that's at risk now, it's just very rare. Most of them have either been worked out of the market or they've been fixed. The chances of you running into this problem is actually tiny. But of course, now we run into our old friend, the shop. No, I'm not booking a time to have them replaced. Don't order a new engine. I'm not bringing the car in. Because they're going to tell you the same thing that you got with the catalytic converter ingestion problem. They will tell you that your car is imminently about to explode. Okay, so what you're telling me here right now is that my car is about to blow up and kill me immediately. It's going to do it either by the engine, which is off, or the catalytic converter, which is just sitting there in the exhaust system, innate. And that you need to take it in for urgent work. They will tell you this thing's all gone. They will tell you every V12 ever made by Aston is going to die unless you urgently run it into their shop and get it sorted. Oh, it's not going to kill me. The car's not making any sounds. What do you mean that's bad? Why would it be making sounds when it's off? It should be what? And the price tag? You can start thinking 4 zeros. Now, price-wise, here in the UK, you're probably looking £20,000 to fix the issue if it happens. If you're in the USA, it's a very different market. I'm not quite sure. I would estimate probably $40,000. It is an expensive fix. And if you're in Australia, well, you might as well just give up. You've got no chance. It is so remote, so difficult to get the parts out there that the chances of fixing this problem in Australia, probably for under 100 grand, just not gonna happen. Okay, let's just focus for a second here. I have no problem with my car. There is no suggestion there's a problem with my car. I'm not about to bring it in and spend 15 to 20,000 £40,000. I'm not about to spend that kind of money changing an engine when the car is fine. It's not going to blow up and kill me here. What do you mean it could? This is a nightmare scenario when it happens, and it does put people off the car. But again, the reality is actually finding a car at risk, it's very, very low. Now, at this point, I know what it looks like. It looks like I'm just hating on all shops. There are good shops out there, don't get me wrong. There are loads of good places to take your Aston Martin to get servicing and repaired. If you're not going to do anything yourself, that's fine. There are loads of good shops out there. Just be aware that there are even more bad shops that will exploit you, that will take advantage of your car, of you, to get lots of money. And that is the general experience you will find if you don't do any research, if you don't do any checking up on the shop, talking to people about experiences. If you just walk into a general shop, more often than not, you will get done over. So make sure that you're researching the shop you're going to, because most of them are bad. Like I said, plenty are good, but most are bad. And that is why my representation of shops in pretty much any video is going to be, generally speaking, negative, because I've had a lot of negative experiences. Most of you will have had negative experiences because most shops will give you negative experiences. You've got to go out, do the research, find the good ones, and then you'll be safe. Of course, just like the shops who will absolutely try and exploit you on this problem at every level that they can get because they want the £20,000 bill that they can charge you, there's also the haters, the people who just don't like it, the people who are jealous, the people who are envious, the people who, for whatever reason, want the problem to exist. And they're everywhere. Anywhere you go on the internet, if you start talking about these cars, the number one thing I heard every time was, you gotta watch out for the tick, the dreaded engine tick, the tick. Everything was about the tick. And the reality is now, it's just not that common anymore. Aston themselves did replace a huge amount of engines under warranty themselves. So there were a huge amount of those early cars which did suffer from the problem, and Aston themselves, they swapped the engines out.
Yeah, good morning. Aston Martin, I really hope you can help me here. I'm trying to find out some information about a supposed problem with the DB9s. There's no issue at all? None. Okay, so there could be an issue. We'll agree. Okay, let's compromise. Let's agree that there could be an issue. We're not saying there is an issue, but there could be an issue. You'll agree? Yes, we agree. There could be an issue, but there isn't an issue. We agree on that. Now, if there could be an issue, how many cars would you expect to see come back to yourselves at Aston Martin? None. None. Of course you wouldn't expect to see any. Okay, in theory, yes, in theory, so we're not talking real, this is theoretical. Of every 100 DB9s made, how many have the ticking? Sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. Yes, I know. In theory, how many Aston Martins could potentially have had? Still no good. I get it. Yes, I know. Okay, let's try this again. Theoretically, for every 100 Aston Martin DB9s that have been built, how many could possibly, just might, theoretically have the ticking problem? You don't keep those records. You don't have any idea. You can tell me how many Aston Martins have a very specific item on the dashboard, for example, but you can't tell me how many you've repaired for this problem. Of course, you've repaired none. Yes, I understand that.
And it appears they did something to those engines because they don't seem to have a problem anymore. They quite often have different engine numbers, suggesting that Aston knew something was up when it was shifting production to its Cologne factory and corrected the problem. Of course, we'll never know the cause. We can't ever know the cause. Every expert believes they know the cause, but the reality is we just don't. Otherwise, if we knew the actual cause, there wouldn't be videos online that are hours long trying to explain it, which don't agree with other videos. We just don't know. I think Aston do, and I think they fixed this problem a long time ago.
Good morning, Aston Martin. Look, I'm just trying to find out about this ticking issue, and I'm just trying to determine how many cars have been affected. None. None? Hello? Hello?
Now, here's my theory on what's actually happening with this tick. And yes, it is just my theory. It is a crazy theory. I'm not qualified or really knowledgeable enough to be able to suggest this, but it doesn't mean I can't take a bit of a punt. My guess is that there was something to do with oil starvation in the engine. I don't think owners or maintenance had anything to do with it. I don't necessarily even think the oil type had anything to do with it. I don't think it's cooling. I think it is the oil. I think what happened is the original design for this engine, there was something about it. Some sort of oil flow point was getting clogged up or not flowing enough, and that was creating probably excess heat around certain cylinders. And once you get these things up to heat for long enough, and these are hot engines, these engines can run really hot. V12s, because they run really hot and you've had it hot long enough, what I think is happening is that restricted oil flow is causing, well, basically overcooking of several of the cylinders, one or more, and the whole thing just can't handle it. It warps, it goes out of shape. You then see flow-on effects from the piston moving around, stretching, wearing other components, and the whole thing develops this tick, which, as we know, is a bit of a death rattle. That's my take on it. I think this problem was actually discovered quite early on. I think Aston probably knew this when it started doing a ton of warranty claims and replacing engines. I think they knew, and I think they fixed it. Although exactly what, we don't really know, because they were in the middle of an engine plant change, and it just made so much sense. You're pushing the engines off to another factory, make a little change along the way, and the next thing you know, the car's no longer got the problem. So my guess, and it is just a guess, is that one of the flow points, some of these oil chambers Some of these oil lines, something somewhere inside the engine simply wasn't flowing enough oil. That meant certain parts of the engine block were overheating, warped the cylinders, and you know the result. That's my theory. Yeah, I'm probably wrong, but that's my thinking on it. So if you are looking at, considering, or own an Aston Martin V12, I wouldn't be that concerned about this problem, especially if you've got a car with a Cologne or later engine, because the prevalence is just so small. It's not zero though. You will always live with that very minute risk. If, however, you've got a car that's not a Cologne engine, and unfortunately there are still some out there, like I said, they do exist. There are a small number. They're very cheap, or they should be very cheap, because they do have this risk, and there's really no getting around it. You just have to take that risk, which is why the values of those cars can be really, really low down. The best way to protect yourself against this is to make sure you've got yourself an engine from the Cologne on error, and that allows you to get an engine which just has a low prevalence for this. Still happens. Like I said, you can buy a brand new Aston of any kind and have engine issues. Just the same as you can with Ferrari or Lamborghini. You can have the same with Ford or GM. It doesn't matter who you buy from, you can have these problems. Even Toyota has the occasional lemon. It does happen to any and all cars, and Aston's no exception. For whatever reason, it did go through this small period of very early DB9s with an engine problem. They've all been pretty much worked out of the market, but every hater on the planet wants to continue the idea that they are all going to fail. And of course, the shops want you to embrace that, because they love you to bring your car in and spend all this money on a repair when it may not ever need it. That is the real reality check of the Aston Martin DB9 ticking problem. Okay, keeping with the new format, we're going to wind it up there. It's winter. We're going to keep things a little bit shorter for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed any parts of this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Simon out.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank.